Now to introduce our speaker tonight, Dara Birnbaum. I actually first saw Dara's work in college when I took a video class at Brown in probably 1987. Shoot, please silence your cell phones. It was a piece that you may see a clip of tonight called Technology Transformation Wonder Woman. I think in 87 we probably wouldn't yet have used the term remix to describe what she was doing, but she was doing what some, what's that? Mashup maybe, but no, not a mashup because you weren't combining it with another text, with another video. So maybe a remix, but anyway, she was talking back to the medium of television from the perspective of a feminist artist and using the medium itself to critique the discourses that it was propagating, kind of turning it against itself in what for me was a really mind-expanding way, and it really influenced my work, the work I was doing early on when I was just becoming an artist. So I'm grateful to you for that. So Dara is a video and installation artist who lives and works here in New York. Her work challenges gender biases and addresses mass media through the intersection of video art and television. She was first introduced to the medium of video while she was living in Florence during the early 1970s, and she became a key figure in forming the feminist art movement that emerged within video art at that time. Since then, her provocative works have become among the most influential and innovative contributions to the contemporary discourse on art and television. Her work has been exhibited at the Museum of Modern Art here in New York, at the Whitney Museum of American Art, and the Metropolitan Museum of Art, at Tate Modern in London, the Reina Sofia in Madrid, MACBA in Barcelona, Kunsthalle Wien in Austria, Museum of Contemporary Art Kiasma in Helsinki. I mean, this just really is like a laundry list of the most important art venues in the world. The Moderna Museet in Stockholm, the National Museum of Modern Art in Tokyo, the Museum of Contemporary Art Los Angeles, SF MoMA, the Pompidou Center in Paris. She's participated in three documentas in Kassel. Documenta 7 in 1982, Documenta 8 in 1987, and Documenta 9 in 1992. It's, I don't know if anyone has participated in more than three, perhaps.
No woman.
No woman?
No woman.
Okay. In 2009, her work was the subject of a major retrospective at SMAC in Ghent, and that then traveled to Museu Serralves in Porto, Portugal in 2010. Dara is represented by Marian Goodman Gallery here in New York. She received a Bachelor's of Art in Architecture from Carnegie Mellon and a BFA in Painting from SFAI, and we're very happy that she teaches both here in MFA Fine Arts and also in the MFA Art Practice Program, which is how Dara and I first met. Please join me in welcoming Dara Birnbaum.
You know, I feel a little, I've lectured in a lot of places, and I've never been anywhere, I'm going to be honest with you, where everyone, except this is like a town hall meeting, I have the feeling, it has that feeling to it, that where people said, oh, we're going to show so-and-so, we have the salon, we have the lounge, I have the bathroom, we're going, you know, and doing this and doing that. And actually, when I started to show, I started in alternative spaces, and I had no belief in the gallery system, actually, and I do have a great gallery now, which I'm proud of. So it's been a long road, 40 years, I realized, 40 years. And I will share it with you the best I can. I started in around 1975, 78. And the real difference, I think, between me and generations coming up, which includes, I can see there's an age difference here, different people, different ages, that is you have total access to imagery pretty much. And when I started, there was almost no access to imagery. And so something like Wonder Woman, which I've become pretty known for, I think it's going on my tombstone or something, is that I had to pirate it. I had to kind of steal it, you know, and go in and not ask permission, to be honest, because permission would not have been granted. And it is copyrighted material. But my feeling is that it's a corporation, a corporately made, you know, image, and therefore it's for mine, for the taking. That I wouldn't touch another artist's work, and I wouldn't appropriate another artist, but I would appropriate what I thought was my landscape. And in the year 1978, when I made Wonder Woman, the average American family, according to the Nielsen ratings, was watching TV some 7 hours and 20 minutes a day in America, which is kind of incredible. So I thought that the most important thing I could do is really to hone in and make my work kind of challenging what that language is and what television is, and see what I could do with it. The first work that I made, I'll go quickly through it, and you were saying that questions should come at the end?
If you'd like to take them earlier, that's fine.
Yeah, I think if you have a question that is so important, just yell it out. The first is lesson plans. Oh, and also to talk about, only because you've addressed it now, about showing and who's showing whom, and if you don't make it into the club because the bouncer didn't let you in, what other club can you go to, you know, kind of thing. I'm sorry, but that's how I relate to it. Is that unfortunately, about last week or 2 weeks ago, I was talking with Joan Jonas in conversation at Artist Space. Was anyone there? Yes. Yeah, it was. I thought it was pretty good. So you're going to hear the same thing, but I'm going to repeat it right now, is that how do you get to show? And this first show at Artist Space, I was turned down. So they sent someone over. Dan Graham was nice enough to say, this woman, young artist, seems very interesting. I think you should see her work. And at that time, Artist Space was by recommendation, one artist to another artist. And they sent somebody over, we're not going to mention whom, and he was in the audience the other night at Artist Space, and they turned me down. But what happened is that I was in with a woman friend, and we were trying to get our work out together, Suzanne Kufler. And they asked Suzanne, would you show? And she said, oh, I'll show. I'd like to, but I'll only show if you show Dara Birnbaum. So conversely, I ended up in Artist Space. So the first piece is I just took reverse angle shots off TV. So it was just holding the camera to the television, looking at prime time, which was all crime drama. And crime drama's main constituent vocabulary element was the reverse angle shot. And below it is exactly what was being said in the frame. And I took the gallery and just surrounded it with these images off prime time, different TV shows, all showing these kind of reverse angle shots. And some of the language was so astonishing, as it still is with the Kardashians or something, which I don't watch. But for example, it might say, oh, look, there is they're looking through the windshield, it's a police story. Is that our guy? I don't know, he looks like our turkey. Oh, don't say that, I want him so bad I can taste him. And that's two white cops talking about a black guy outside the car. So I then tackled like another prime time that had what was a special effect. The special effect in around 1978 was a burst of light. So Wonder Woman, you know, becomes transformed into a superwoman. I did not like the image. I didn't call myself a feminist video artist. I didn't like any terminology, actually. And I didn't think that way, except that my first degree is in architecture, and I was the only woman in my class, and I was the only woman to graduate in 3 years. So I think I learned it, you know, that, and I was 16 when I started, so I think I learned in that way, you know, how to fight for oneself through one's voice. And of course, I'm female. And so Wonder Woman came along, and I just thought, this is absolutely an image that I reject of women. How do I get hold of it? I begged young guys that liked me at that time, who were working, it's true, in the industry, unimaginable right now, but true, that in the industry go in and say, can you get me that image out? It was like getting dope out of a place, really, and like stealing drugs or something like that. And go in, get the footage, and then in a place that was in the arts, like film video arts or something, was able to edit at night. I had a home black and white TV. I didn't even know she wore red, white, and blue, but I wanted to make this video. So we're going to show you the first video. If you've seen it before, it's nice to see it again, you know. So you're talking about showing and like having, it's not a show really. It's a lounge. It could be a salon. It could be things like that. And I was kind of opposed to the galleries, but also the galleries might have been not opposed to me, but they were pretty locked up. It wasn't a time for young people that they could get in easily. And a group of us, young group together, like a peer group of about 10 people, decided we'd show in alternative spaces. And that made me want to show even more alternative. So, for example, you can see this was actually a hair salon. And what I mean is you're exposed to zillions, I'm sure it is zillions, of monitors everywhere. At that time, there were no monitors anywhere except this hair salon, actually in Soho, had a monitor in the window, and they owned one videotape, and the videotape was the Italian version of Woodstock. I remember that. And somebody used to yell out from the audience, shampoo, it was shampoo. No, it was the Italian version of Woodstock. And how do you get your work shown? So I went in and I asked the woman, could I show my work on weekends out to the street? You could turn it into the store, out to the street. And she said, but what is your work about? And honestly, 40 years later, I'm not that great at saying what my work is about unless you sit me down for an interview, et cetera. So I said, well, the work's about Wonder Woman. And she said, well, that's fantastic, because I love Wonder Woman, and I've been told I look like Wonder Woman. And she did a little bit, you know? And that's how I got that show. So we had and that's their own graphics, you know, the photographs are what they chose for their own images of actually, you can look at them almost like a man taking away the woman's hair as a symbol of power. And there I would have the monitor showing out to the street, and you'd pay for your haircut next door to it. So that's the contextual relationship to it. I will say that there is a great book, and I say that to you because you're in the master's program, by T.J. Demos. Have you heard of him? It's just T.J. and then D-E-M-O-S. I think Mark is a good writer. Yep, and he wrote, there's a series called After All, which would be interesting, I think, for you in any way. And each of the books is like one book on one artist on one work. And so for me, it's on Wonder Woman. And it's about 200 pages or something, but it goes through the history and the contextualization of the piece and what happens when a piece like this that started kind of trying to break through into seams and not go with traditional forms of gallery, et cetera, get owned by, for example, as it is, the Museum of Modern Art, what that can mean to a work of art, what does it mean to a work of art. So I'll just say that. This was like another step to take with appropriated imagery called PM Magazine. And PM Magazine was one of the first earliest soft news programs. So instead of getting the news during prime time, what you can look at, and there's tons of them now, is like where do penguins, how do they live in zoos in San Diego, and where to get sushi in New York. That was this episode. And I took the opening animation and I stole it, appropriated, and took it and rearranged it and tried to isolate and change its vocabulary and its syntax and come up with PM Magazine, which shows only these beautiful pictures of people strolling or skating or all the leisure time activities in America and what that stands for. And that's interwoven, or like an early mashup, with Wang commercial. And the Wang was the largest seller of computers in the world, and that had as its icon this woman that you can barely see right now at a computer terminal, and then I cut into that and contextualize the images. So we're going to show that, and what we're going to do is play one channel out of 4 that was at Documenta 7, and I'm going to keep showing you different slides of different situations that the piece was in different museums. Oh yes, that's a good point. I steal everything. So that was taken from what happened, and it's a good point about making work. I knew the first half of the work and what I was trying to do with it, so we won't play it yet for a minute. And yeah, and I knew the first half. I'm going to take her, I'm going to, how do you not freeze an image, but how do you isolate it, take it out of its context, you know, and present it in a way that it's constantly being looked at, that she spins and she doesn't stop spinning. As I'm editing that on old open reel systems, which drove me crazy, and I almost put my hand through the floor, through the wall actually. As I had the radio on while I was editing, and coming through the radio was this Wonder Woman song. And I had never heard it before, but it was Wonder Woman in Discoland Band. I looked it up. They put out one record, an extended LP that was like for the clubs, called Wonder Woman in Discoland, and it was on Hippopotamus Records, and I got hold of it. And what you're hearing is a synthesis of side A and B. A was the American version, and B was the European version. So when you hear any, ooh, I'm your Wonder Woman, that's the European version. So that's what the music was. Okay. What happened during those years, around 1982, well, I was the only video person actually asked into the Documenta, so that was a big deal. They just didn't see it as a developed art form, I guess, in a way. The next one had many more people who were involved in media, but we called it video then. And also, for the Documenta, for example, which to me this is ICA in Boston. To document it, it was a big deal to me to get in, and they wouldn't tell me where I was going. So I had in mind how to construct, yeah. The younger you are, the worse you're treated sometimes. And and sometimes older, because I'll talk about that later. But anyway, all fairness, I was very glad to get in. I was one of 2% of women who got into that Documenta. I was the only video person who got into that Documenta. It was done by the director, was Rudy Fuchs. And what I decided is to use chroma key blue. And if you know that color, chroma key, it stood for in television, just like blue matte had stood for in film, that anywhere you put it, another image could go. So electronically, now they have ultimatte, things much more green. That if you have that, you can put another image. So I thought, I'll paint out my own space wherever they put me. I'll bring this kind of production type setup, which is speed rail, and quickly assemble it, make a frame. All the video can be behind it, so you didn't have to worry where you're running it to, or that they say we don't have a room for it. I didn't like video to be in the dark because it kept being related only to cinema, and I didn't want that, so I wanted video in the light, and that's what I fought for in this. That's at the Whitney. That's the first time they let a video installation out on the main floor. And someone asked me, what's the red wall? Which is a great question. This is the Museum of Modern Art. This was in Cut to Swipe. Did anyone see that show? Oh, okay. What? It was great? Yay. Yay, Stuart.
Last year, right?
Last year. Yeah, it lasted for about 8 months. So it went from 1 year, 14 to 15. And it came down in May. And They thankfully, and I am thankful, bought this work into permanent collection. The thing was, it was sold out. We can talk about things like that and editions and everything else. So Stuart was saying to me, certainly you must have an edition somewhere. I don't hide editions, I don't fake editions. But what happened is I realized that at the Hudson River Museum, which I showed at the very beginning, was the prototype for Documenta, and that had never been shown again. And that was an edition that could be up for sale. The red stood for that viscerally, red was a very hard color for a television signal at that time, like if the news weathermen don't wear a red tie because it becomes too vibrant, and blue was the chroma key blue. So that was the difference there. And we have an expert in the audience who can confront me with that if we wanted to. Thank you. This is a different project, so I thought I'd bring it up. It existed, it took me 2 years to build it. It was the first of its kind. The name of the project generally was Rio. Rio stood for an entertainment slash shopping center in Atlanta, Georgia. They had an international competition. I didn't want to be part of the competition. I was asked to by the arts agency down there if I would enter. And what I said, that let me think about it. And it's a call for entries. What the person, it was like a Southern Donald Trump kind of developer who was building a whole brand new by Architectonica shopping center. He wanted something for it that he called electronic. That's all he cared about, that it was electronic. So that fit in video, things like that. And I went ahead, I did compete, that's a site map. They make their site #1 just to give you the kind of their mentality. Their mentality is that that's the brochure for the complex. My video wall, I did a video wall for him. It was the first of a kind digital wall in the United States. Came in, it's on the same page as the allure and the accessibility of free parking. So that's how the art's treated. This is what I thought was where they're going to build the center. It was, but I thought it was a park. And they were going to remove all these trees. And my original degree is in architecture, and I did environmental design. So I was kind of very against kind of ripping out magnolia trees and putting in fake, not fake, but bamboo, with very corporate, you know, symbolic gesture to do, et cetera. And I'd say, well, that's a park. And they'd say, that's not a park. This is Needle Park. This is where people shoot up. So this was a gentrification move. And I was kind of against that. I said, you know, I'm from New York. If you put 2 trees together, you have a park. So let's call it a park. And this is the new complex. And you can put your piece in the competition anywhere. And I decided to put it right in the middle in that more reddish kind of square, which was the open public plaza there. And the magenta mark is where the video wall would be. And you can kind of see where it's going. They're pointing where the video wall would be. And like I said, it's the first digital video wall. I was amazed by the image breaking through its own frame at that time. That was a big deal. And I wanted to bring to it what I thought were 3 different aspects of video, which is that video could be a recording implement, that video could be a transmitter of things like the news into homes, and that video could be interactive. And I wanted all 3 to come together, and I wanted to make the type of image that would never repeat itself, because this was supposed to be a permanent video wall. So how do you make permanence in imagery with a flow of images that never repeat? So the Needle Park, and that memory of that park, the electronic memory, went up onto the wall. Sometimes I would play with it because you can configure walls to do different kinds of special effects. And this, what happens is we built 2 large light boxes, so it's as if making that whole wall a light box. And the light boxes were at the main entryways to the this plaza area. If you crossed it, the camera would catch your silhouette. So do you know what luminance key or keyhole is? Not so much. What it means anyway is luminance is that it's done with light, that the light ratio by backlighting that means it's 100% white, that anything that comes across it goes to black. and that what's black, we had a switcher, and the switcher would cut a keyhole. So this image of the person entering would go onto the video screen. So where you see a face kind of coming in, very bad documentation because everyone got into a lawsuit except me, so I can talk about that too. But you kind of see there the movement of a face in there. What that is CNN's uncut news via satellite being transmitted. We were taking it down and putting it, and I can't even operate this, but putting it up on the screen, and so that your body would bring in the news of the moment unedited. And then you'd go home at night and perhaps see it edited. So that's a kind of very big project for that time, right around 1990. It's a bit of a breakthrough, first of its kind project. It's not existent right now. We can talk about why. It was up for about maybe 2 years. Okay, Tiananmen Square, after I take some tea. This, going from outside, public space, inside, back to gallery, institutional space, this was an attempt to deal with how the flow of images was coming through from basically China about Tiananmen Square in 1989. And what happened, and what I did is I wanted to reverse the way video is normally shown, usually on a podium, pedestal, or something like that, and say, no, these things are coming down from transmissions to us, and kind of exaggerate that. I used Sony Watchmen. I don't know if anyone here is old enough to remember Sony Watchmen. Yes, there's just a few of us. And they were great. They were about this big. And when you turned to the side, you couldn't really see the image. You had to really go right forward to see it. Otherwise, it's kind of off. And I actually like that feature. It's not good for conservation museums where these are owned now, but it was great at the time because I wanted to take the viewer very close to the images and have them do a kind of pathway through this thing, 4 different depots and a large screen TV. This is a museum in Ghent. And what would happen in each of these is there was a song written by 40 sympathetic Taiwanese called The Wound of History was one. One of them was actually the protests themselves. One channel that's my favorite, I have to say, is when CBS and CNN were taken off air by the Chinese government. So they were forced to cease transmission. To me, that was a very historical moment in time. So this is not about Tiananmen Square as much as the transmission of news in that way. And then this TV, the larger one, is constantly changing images because it's grabbing with a hidden surveillance switcher imagery from each of the 4 different quadrants that you could be at. So the image you're at could be taken away and put on TV and constantly being re-edited the way television kind of edits the news to about 7 seconds, 11 seconds kind of cuts. This is in Portugal, in Porto. I'm going to show you 2 different pieces that were done for MTV in the 80s and then in the 90s. The first one were art breaks. I don't know if any of you have ever seen any. They've done them occasionally. Do you know the author, historian, critical commentator, Benjamin Buchloh, for example? Good writer. And Benjamin's friend was very angry at me for taking the MTV commission because he said, what in the fuck are you doing by going into a supermarket of imagery? And I said, let me try, let me see if I fail or succeed. And you got 30 seconds. And here was the thing, is that they said to you, we'd like to commission you. They commissioned about 6 artists. I was the only video media artist. Richard Tuttle would be a different artist, Jonathan Borofsky. Do 30-second spot. To get the gig, you got to do 1 second of MTV. So everyone put it in the front or at the back of their piece. I try to put it in the middle of the work, and you'll see how. Then they said, you have no budget. So I said, well, I never had any budget, you know, so, which is really true. So then they said, no, you don't understand what we're saying. Do whatever you want. Because these were the heydays, the beginning, like MTV, like we can do whatever we want. They'd take me by, limousine down to the editing house, this, you want this editing house, you can go here, you can do that. Everything though in 30 seconds, mentioning MTV for 1 second. So this is what happened. So if you can notice it at all, there's Coco the Clown, that was done by Max Fleischer. They said they could get anything I wanted, any appropriation. It took them 6 months to find Max Fleischer, who I think is the greatest animator of the last century in America. He would draw the character Coco the Clown. Coco the Clown would frequently wrestle the pen away from the animator and try to animate himself. And in this case, there's a mechanical machine animating. That's all appropriated imagery. It starts to draw a woman, Coco's hat or something goes like this. He's delighted. Then the part is I found an animator who worked in the 40s for animation studio for Fleischer. He came in and drew new cell animation. So all the poking of the pen into changing woman, changing woman, changing woman till the bottle falls over is brand new animation that we did for it. And I'll tell you a very, very quick story, is that, for an example, my producer, who kind of went between commercial and the arts, was making a bet with the house that did the animation. They were punching her in the butt. And they did the pencil-in drawings that way, the cell animation, but. And she said, I will bet you $25 that within the first, 10, 20 seconds she's up here, she'll reject this. So I did, so they won the $25. And then they changed it, but all I could get them to do, I only got one redraw out of that, was in the arm instead of that, but it's just a little, that kind of mashing between the commercial. Couple of years later, the arts agencies from the Whitney Museum, the American Center in Paris, and the Public Art Fund came together and said, we would like you to be one of 7 artists who does media, who we're selecting 7 French artists, and we're going to call it Trans Voices. And you French artists are going to talk to American artists or say something you're feeling about the founding of America, because it was the 500th anniversary of the founding of America. So I honestly, even though we had Columbus Day, don't believe in it that much. So I did something different, and can we show that? And it's called Trans Voices. Here, you did have a budget. You had $3,500, but you got twice as much time, 60 seconds to say something. I didn't know we had lost so many nuclear reactors at sea, but this is even going back years ago. Wouldn't even want to think of what it is now, but that was very well researched. And there's just, the whole coastline is just filled with nuclear reactors that are lost in America. And it's funny, in France, they didn't have, for atomic weaponry type situations, you didn't see much on the map when you did the research. That's because they put everything into the South Pacific. So I'm going to go back to document 9, to Transmission Tower, which is over there. And Transmission Tower also had a sense of politics. I was very disturbed, to say the least, by the Gulf War, and didn't know how to face it. And that's something you can ask questions about. I didn't know how to take images directly from the Gulf, and I still don't know how to take images directly from devastation that's happening right now. And instead, I was present at a national students convention. I was teaching at Princeton, and my students got me, and I was the only person allowed in to film. And one thing I filmed was Allen Ginsberg giving a reading, actually, and some students were against it because they said, we're not here, for poetry readings or something. But for me, it was lovely. He opened up by saying Humbaum, and it was a poem he had written for the war in Vietnam. And I asked him permission. I said, could I use it for the Documenta? And he said, yes. In fact, I'm rewriting it because of the Gulf. And I said, that's exactly why I'm trying to do this. So he gave permission. So what it is I took a transmission tower from Peoria, Illinois, and that's the structure of this, and brought it to the Documenta. And put monitors, and the monitors are slightly curved, and they're like a linear video wall. And the curve is the curve of the most common bomb that we were dropping at that time on Iraq. And there are 3 sets of images. There's Ginsburg going, whom bomb? Who do we bomb? Why do we bomb? We bomb who? And then there's a little image of Bush in there citing his 1,000 Points of Light speech when he won the nomination that year for running. You can see that. And then there are images of the students in their convention. I don't know. I look back and I say, as we all do, it's kind of an Andy Warhol, isn't it, electric chair color green or something? So, but that's what I picked. And what he's leaving in Bush is a deposit. The deposit is simply his waveform signal of what he's saying at the time. So I can play you a composite of this just to give you a taste of what it feels like for these images to be jumping and falling. There's 8 monitors, and they flow like a linear video wall. You won't see them clearly because the technology couldn't do that on a composite video that size at this time. Nowadays you could. The very famous Read My Lips, the world is 1,000 points of light, Iran and Iraq will reach a state of peace. Can you hear it?
Yeah, you mind playing that really quick? Or?
Playing that? Did it not play this time? Do you want to play it again, or?
No, what happens after this?
Oh, just bullshit? Complete bullshit, that anything you ever believed in didn't come true the way he said it would come true. And I'm scared shitless of the election coming up, by the way. So, you know, if I ever thought there was idiocy before, I'm certainly reaching it again. But I will get you the words if you want them. I will get you the words. And after that, quickly, is Hostage, which was done, this is at Paula Cooper Gallery, again, talking about the way that images are received by us. This is the death of Hans Martin Schleyer. He was an industrialist in Germany in 1977, going way back. This piece was made in the 90s. He was killed. Does anyone know the history of this by the RAF and the Biedermeinhof? Hostage exchange rate would be that for 6 people who were imprisoned of the Biedermeinhof in the jails in Germany, the exchange for the capital industrialist Hans Martin Schleyer, who they caught. Everyone died. Schleyer was killed. Great article by Baudrillard on it, saying that once he went onto television to say that he's an enemy of the people, that his image was worth everything, Baudrillard, and of course his life was worth nothing. So then they killed him, and then the Biedermeinhof in jail supposedly committed suicide. Of course, that's, and Gerhard Richter did a great series of 6 paintings of the people in jail. What happens in this piece is that each one of these monitors again shows a different sequence of what was happening, for like training of the military, capture of the Biedermeinhof, and then going back the other way. In here, the big monitor is showing Hans Martin Schleyer, and he says he gets on air, forced to get on air by the RAF, and say, I'm an enemy of the people, I am a capitalist, I'm an industrialist. And after this, he died. It took me going to 10 countries in Europe to get that footage unearthed again because they wanted to censor it. And I understand why. The family very much wanted it censored. But I did put it back out. I thought it was necessary to put it back out. And at the other end of the room, the other big monitor, is all the reportage on this in America. So almost like kind of archaeology file cabinet of different images moving quickly, newspaper stories of how this came through, how this came through. Now what happens is that if you don't go there and go here, if you try to line up through the targets and look to the TVs, you are targeted by an interactive laser system that goes across the room. So if you're looking at me trying to line up with that, you can see that I'm targeted. If I'm targeted, all the images stop flowing. It's only when you move out of the line of fire that everything starts to flow again. Then this is a different kind of work, very poorly documented again, Taguki. Taguki stands for flag. It's the, is the flag of South Korea. In the first biennial in Seoul, you probably know the curator because he's written now about 1,000 books, Hans-Ulrich Obrist. He's a good friend. That he got 20 people, I think, artists, architects, usual mix for Hans-Ulrich. And we could occupy the electronic signs in downtown Seoul. And what would happen is you got 40 seconds to go up, or 60 seconds, like an intervention. And there were 40 of these. And sometimes you could see maybe like 5 different artworks at one time going up on these boards. Right at the time we were doing this, there was an opening where 7 families were allowed through from North Korea to South Korea. And I was hoping that this was a bridge and that great things were going to happen. So I'm as off as Bush was off. And of course, this is never going to happen, but this is what I did. I did motion graphics. It's no audio. So that's the flag of South Korea. Has anyone thrown the I Ching? I Ching, I Ching. Yes. Me too, in my older days. So what it is taking the trigrams that exist on the flag, only using them and making them into hexagrams from the I Ching, like means union, interrelationship, everything positive, going forward, fellowship with men, etc. And these would change on the board. So what happened is, I didn't know it, but this was taken down. And they didn't tell me. I do appreciate when people tell me things. I found out this week I'm in 2 shows I didn't even know about. That was just wonderful. Probably one of them is yours. No, you didn't put me in. Sorry. But in this one, they didn't tell me it went down, and it went down because the businessmen protested and said, if you don't get this off, we're not going to advertise on the board anymore, et cetera, et cetera. So there were 2 pieces out of the 20 that went down. One was on abortion, done by a woman in Korea, and one that never would have even made it on Times Square board here. I don't think this would have either, and so they went down. So that was it. And I'm going to just quickly do 2 pieces and then open up for long questions or discussion. And one is different, coming into this century, Ivarton. What happens is that I think that for a few years now, somehow I've landed in a camp that you might be calling gender politics. And I guess it was very much trying to still address, as I had at the very beginning with Wonder Woman, and as Mark had said was feminist practice, the voice of the woman. Erwartung is an opera. I'm pronouncing it wrong in German. If anyone knows German, you can call it out very nicely. But I'm trying. It means expectancy. It was written by Schoenberg at the turn of the century in 1909. He amazingly reached out. It's a 1-act opera, and the only character in it is a woman. She feels that she's lost her lover, which she has. She doesn't know if she's killed him or he's simply lost in a forest. Of course, the forest, at that time, 1909, Schoenberg reached for a woman, Marie Pappenheim, who was around the circle of Freud. And he was changing composition, musical scoring. She was getting involved in the first time the unconscious was kind of represented. And he asked her to write the libretto. And so it's this woman who's lost in a forest. The forest is really the forest of her mind. She's looking for light. She's saying, if only I could get warm, there's the moon. Oh no, it's turning blood red. Oh, you kissed her, didn't you? You did this, you know, she was a hussy. Just ugly language. But I made 17 tableaus out of this, out of the language of Marie Poppenheim, and put them up this way. And this is Marion Goodman Gallery. It's actually only one projector, and I'm kind of very proud of that, it's one image thrown onto a large surface that's plexiglass that has a Duratrans print of Schoenberg's own stage set for this opera. Projected onto that is this woman enacting out 17 scenes. And this is the Schoenberg. What happens is, in the end, she says, if only everything would come to light. And of course, light is the way we see and become visible. But of course, if everything comes to light, like to consciousness, she can't hold on to her desires anymore. So she loses everything. So the whole gallery goes white and you only see the Schoenberg. But as the 17 scenes are going, this is what you get, a kind of, I think, forest of images. The reason that they're multiplying is that they're projected onto the plexiglass. Following up quickly with another piece, based not in operas, is certainly music like Schoenberg. This one is based on the two Schumanns, Robert and Clara Schumann, shown in Marion Goodman Gallery. And what happened is that I went onto YouTube and tried to see, well, how many people are playing Robert Schumann, arabesque, a pretty well-known composition. And it turned out to be hundreds. And I looked and say, well, who's playing Clara Schumann, his wife, who was a composer as well? Well, there was one. So what happens is, in this piece that's pretty large, it's about 50 feet, you see different musicians constantly changing, but it goes together. I do not have good documentation of this, so I only have the stills for you. Playing arabesque, playing arabesque, playing arabesque. Then it breaks, and you see the one woman who's playing Clara's piece. And the Schumann, for me, was as beautiful, her piece, as his is, but it's relatively unknown. And on the left side, you see her diary, pieces of her diary. Now at the very end here, as they're playing arabesque, is one screen on the extreme right, and that's actually stills that kind of morph into one another. And they're from the love song Hollywood version of the two Schumanns and what they love, and he's turning to her, oh, Clara, what's wrong? You know, don't feel bad, I made this composition, I think I'll call it arabesque. And she plays it. So when you walk in the gallery, you feel the music coming and coming, but you feel the breaks, and then her music, her deep thoughts, and then goes back to how do we play arabesque. And I don't have any bang up ending for you. Sorry for that. I could play a part of Damnation of Faust, but what I thought is that it might be good to take questions because we've gone through an awful lot of work. And I do like to converse. I think it's really, really important. So. For me, this is the most important part. Anything, I know some people, I'm thinking of one who just passed away, unfortunately, and they hated questions, and they didn't like when they were asked, or how much money did it take to make that, or why did you do this? But I like questions because I'm getting older and I like to pass on information. And I feel I've been through a lot, and I actually have been in lounge things, and I've been in toilets. I was asked to go into a toilet in London and have my work shown there, Damnation of Faust. And every week would be a different video in the toilet in London. And actually, so I've got an awful lot of experience. I can talk about the 2 shows I'm in right now that I didn't even fucking know I was in. So one is Greater New York.
Hi, Dara. I had a question not about a specific work, but the transition from being an architect to an artist, and if you could speak about that a little bit, and maybe how your awareness of maybe how that influenced your working in this medium.
Yeah, I was pretty young, and I worked for a firm called Lawrence Halpern and Associates in San Francisco. And I really thought at that age that I was going to just clean up the Bay. You know, we did a lot of started to do the first environmental design in the country. Lawrence's wife was Anna Halpern, who's very famous for Dancers Workshop. So many great people came out of that. And even that seemed to not satisfy me, maybe being young, but also seeing how much of it was economics, governmental, always having a client, the economy, obviously, and things like that. And I felt like at a very, very young age that I was building in things, structures, you know, where I want to kind of explode structures instead. And I asked for time off because it was a very slow time. And all the guys in the office, mainly men, were taking time off. And I said, could I take time off and go to the San Francisco Art Institute? Because I was doing specialty presentation work for them. And I thought I'd bring back some tools of the trade of art to express better what we were doing in architecture. And the more I went toward art, the more I liked it, the more they asked me, we can give you scholarship, the more the architecture said, we're still slow, whatever it was doing. And what really fixed it was I started to not like being in America, which might happen again very soon. And I decided to go with my lover to Italy, where we met. And by accident, I ran into a very tiny gallery. And I didn't know it was a gallery, an art gallery. And they were closed, basically, but the light was on. And in the back was a monitor. And I thought they were watching TV, which I hadn't seen. I was very homesick. So they said, like, oh, come in, unlock it, we'll come in. And I went back there, and I saw the first video art I ever saw in my life. You know, so I didn't know what it was. They started to explain it to me. They had people come through like Akanchi, Oppenheim, Graham, Joan Jonas, Charlemagne Palestine, Dick Landry. And because it was a relatively small city, and they seemed to like me, and I had a lot of energy, and I could speak English. I think the artists coming in like that, you know, because I was so excited, oh my God, this is great work, you know, whatever, and would talk to me in ways, I don't think they ever would have talked to me in the street here, never, you know, and I just fortunate. And the more I saw the video, the more I was drawn to it. And when I moved back a year later, because it was in the hands of guys, basically, when I moved back here, someone lent me a porta pack, and that's the very first work I started to do. And I didn't turn back. Yeah. Yep.
The first video that you showed us with Wonder Woman, could you elaborate on why you chose to repeat the same moment over and over again?
Yeah. How old are you?
23.
Okay. Well, I've got you beat by 40 years or more. What that means is that at that time, way back then, that was a way of, I hate when students do that now, actually. It was a way, like, how do you get this image? How do you get this image off the screen? What do you do with it, you know? And so my thought was, I wanted her to get caught up in this endless twisting and transforming, because on TV it just went boom, and she was Wonder Woman, you know? boom, she was not again. And I thought, it's just fucking not that easy. So, so I went and I kind of made her spin backwards, spin backwards. But I think that repetition, it comes out of growing up on like pop art, minimalism, and how repetition might have, I saw it already in Warhol, Campbell's soup cans. I think something about that affected me. Does that make sense? Or, but I'm wondering, like lately it was written about because there's a Wonder Woman film coming out. And I think in New York New York Times Review of Books or something, they mentioned actually my work. It said some young girl years ago did a piece on Wonder Woman that might seem simplistic now, but at the time was a big breakthrough, So it's interesting, At that time it moved very fast, Now it might move very slow. But it is what it is, That's why the book by T.J. Demos is pretty good.
Dara, I think that maybe we may not realize that when you started your early pieces,
Expert in the field, where he's
technology that they were state-of-the-art technology that were not readily available to the independent artists, and maybe you want to explain the difficulty you must have had in having this type of works created.
Yeah, like I said, it's one, you had to kind of steal the imagery. There was no cable TV. There was no devices for home recording. You couldn't get it off air. So I kind of begged, borrowed, stole from people in the industry. And also, I mean, you could hold a Portapack or something at the time, because Namjoon and some people had that up to the screen. But I didn't want to do that. I wanted the actual footage to come out, like that was transmitted. And the editing was atrocious, because I'm trying to edit 7 frames at a time. Boom, 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 boom. And we're going in a way that I said I almost put my hand through the wall, because you had to line it up with 2 machines, pre-roll it, pray that it went in together, you mean like that, and no computer editing, no ding, 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 ding. And it was pretty funny, because years later I'd see people do repetition, and all they did is would like set, some device on some, multi-million-dollar machine, this frame, repeat edit 20 times, go boom. So very, 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 very different. Even coming here today, I'm still amazed that I come with a little envelope of DVDs, and you hardly need those if I would have it on my thumb drive. And, in a thumb drive, and I still don't understand these things fully. And when I used to come, it would be like picking up, do you remember, Mark? You pick up big, heavy tapes, and I would edit on 1 inch, and they would weigh, 1, 2, 3 pounds each or something. And you'd be bringing 40 of them in with you. It was just incredible. So everything's changed. Yeah. Yes?
I have a question about that. Does it make you still, like, you had rock star tech moments, like, does it make you still want to play with technology and, move defeated, or, like, the way, oh, sorry. Hey. Like, does it make you still want to, use it in a new and exciting way, or do you feel defeated by that it can always do more than you can understand now?
I'm having a hard time keeping up.
Okay, I'm sorry.
I am.
Okay. Not
but,
with what I'm saying, but with what? Okay.
No, I mean, with the hard time keeping up with the technology, and how much it changes and how rapidly, and what that really means. The biggest great venture for someone who's 68 is going into YouTube. What I'd like to do now, I'm trying to do new work with Marian Goodman, is see how really horrific images could possibly be presented without the horrific part. And that would be from all things that go online, but then are taken offline, we're not allowed to see. Where there's a lot of things like ICs and things that are presented, but they're taken down, but they're talked about endlessly. So in a society where it used to be when I was growing up that a picture's worth 1,000 words, it's now 1,000 words without a picture. It was a very, very strange time. And I have to learn how to confront that. And I think for anyone making art, these are really radical times in a way that should be challenged. And I'm hoping I'm not dead yet. When they don't tell me where my work's showing, I sometimes feel a little, yeah, like bye-bye. No, I know. It's such a terrible, it's PS1, I don't blame them. MoMA apologized, my distributor apologized. 2 days before it, I find out I'm in the 2 days before. My Carnegie Mellon that I went to school posted and said congratulations or something, and I said, oh, you know, and I thought this is a joke. So I went and I looked up and they had released their list, and they see me on the list. And on the list there are like asterisks or crosses, but there's no key, so you don't know what they mean. So there's a cross after my name, but it's really probably an X, but it looks like a cross. And I thought, am I dead? You know, like, you know, it just was a horrible feeling. We took 5 days last week trying to get to Australia, who's showing a work of mine, who I didn't know what the hell they're showing, but I see it because I Google. And I see it up, and then I try to contact them, and there's 16 hours difference where they are. And we're trying to find out what are you showing, and they're not answering, and then you get scared, well, it's a bootleg, but I took from everyone anyway, you know, so.
So they're not paying you to do these, to be
No,
in these
they
shows?
don't pay, and there was a time in the 70s in San Francisco, and then again, I think in the early 2000s, where artists were trying to get together to ask for fees, you know, if you showed. And the only time for me, usually I'll get a fee now, and I've been not demanding it enough, and I don't know if it's there enough, is if I do like a retrospective, they'll build in a fee for me. So.
I'm interested in the relationship between sound and image in your work, beginning with technology transformation, Wonder Woman, that piece, the way you worked with the A side and the B side of that song, or the American and the European version, the cover of LA Woman in the PM magazine piece, and then on through your body of work, it seems like sound, and in particular music, sometimes working with the image, sometimes working against the image, is just a really important aspect to your work. I'm wondering if you could speak to that.
Yeah. I think that the whole generation that I was growing up with in video, which I think when we had the talk at Artist Space with Joan, she felt we're not that different, but we are different in generations. And I feel that mine was the generation after that. And that many of us felt that sound and image were equally important in video and then media work, and they're both there to be dealt with, and that was pre-MTV. And I think that most of the experiments that utilize both the sound, the audio, and the picture image, you know, we're fulfilling the contract that this is what it's capable of. I also am someone who grew up on Godard. And for me, he was just a hero. And I remember that when he tried to escape the Paris networking of the film industry, he went with Jean-Marie Mieville and went back to Switzerland from where he was and started a group called Son Image. And I thought sound and image, and that he was absolutely right, that it's both. And so it was trying to deal both. Like, for example, Kiss the Girls, Make Them Cry, which I didn't show today, is Georgie Porgy, Toto, Ashford and Simpson. They were #1 on the disco floor as the imagery for Hollywood Squares was on TV. So it's taking two #1s, and I felt the two industries are very related to each other, and just kind of did mash them together in that way. Sometimes it is finding the image, sometimes it's going with it. LA Woman, that documenta had virtually no video. I think Joan Jonas did have a video in her piece, but it wasn't a media-related piece. It was like just a partial statement and general idea also. And I felt that it was a return, many people said that, of neo-expressionism in painting, especially from Germany and Italy. And so I tried to get a piece of music, and I was living in LA at the time. Like, LA, when I see your hair is burning, your heels are filled with, you know, something very expressionist. And I thought, oh, at that time I had fun. And so I thought, like, oh, how fun, you know, your heels are, and all this expressionist art around you, neo-expressionist art around you. And I was teaching at Cal Arts. And I had a great student who could mix like crazy. He eventually went into the industry and became pretty well known. And we mixed together, we'd say, you're gonna do the acid rock guitar, you're gonna do the vocals, they're gonna be R-rated, not X-rated. You're gonna do this. And we brought people in separately, and they never met. And we did everything in the mix. So we had fun that way too, because it was the first time, you know, in these tech rooms and things like that. It's also interesting because before me, and there wasn't before me, people, the rooms, the technical rooms you would go into and work out in post-production houses had actually no attention, and Maurice can maybe say something about that, to sound that much. Sound was avoided. You know, what you could do is sweeten your sound a little bit, but there was no real facility to compose. There might be an EQ board or something that was around, you know? Exactly. And if we have to later on in post somewhere down the line, we can sweeten it up. But I think it was people who were involved in early video who started to realize the dynamics. Funny thing is, I just finished an article on Bruce Conner in film, and I didn't realize that. But in the 60s, here he was, supposedly one of the first people using pop sound, you know, tracks, What I'd Say, you know, things like that to cut against, to you know, so it's embedded in there. Anyone know Conner's films? What? Like a movie. A movie. But you have to spell it with all caps. That's what I learned when they did the editing on my thing, is any time you mention a film by him, you have to put it all in caps. I didn't know why. But there's a big retrospective coming next year to MoMA and San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, and thankfully they asked me to write where I didn't know that much, but out of just my work seen as a next generation to his. I would look the work up. The films are great. Films are really great. So it's hot, but it's not time. I'm very excited to talk more.
I was just really interested in your process. Like, you obviously have a fascination with pop culture and TV as a medium in of itself, and you use the medium itself in your work. But there are a couple of circumstances that I saw tonight, like the MTV one where you found the illustrator, and then the Ginsberg footage, which you filmed yourself. So I was curious if that's part of if your process is more involved in the search for specific work, starting from one idea, or if like it's more of this organic kind of, the idea is what it is and you find or make. Does that make sense?
I think what happened is, I know that I was very enticed by editing. It was for me like a chess game. Like I did like that much film, and I have a degree in painting, but I feel that I never truly got into painting. That once I saw video, I loved it. I like that at that time you could see it, but you could never really hold it like film. Like Goran, who worked with Jean-Luc Godard, had said he loves film because he can lick the leader. I'm absolutely the opposite personality to that. So I like see it as a chess game of the mind, and then putting things down, and I love that a lot. but it does start with the idea. But sometimes it starts even with a sound. Like I didn't show, and I don't know if you want to go away with 10 minutes of Damnation of Faust or not, you know, or everyone's exhausted, but it's like I hear a sound, and I thought, oh, it sounds like church bells or something. And that sounds to me like the beginning of Faust, you know, and if it's Faust, what am I doing? And that I filmed all myself. And it's not heard of as much. But should I show like just one example? It's musical, it's maybe a nice way. And then I well, that's like one of 3 parts. It's the evocation, and the second part is a woman's monologue. It follows very, very abstractly. Faust. This is kind of the call at the beginning when, according to most versions of Faust, he hears the church bells, he looks out the window, he sees children running. He says, oh, he would give anything to have the feelings again, the emotions, because he's a very studied, learned man, but he can't feel life anymore. So he said, I would give anything for that. So the devil comes and makes a pact with him, and he gets a woman, Marguerite. Second part is about Marguerite, what she's given up, who she is. Third part actually goes into the kids here coming back and talking about looking at themselves 2 years later. What happened? The playground got all torn down. Their environment was torn down. What did they rebuild? How do they feel about it? And then the second half is a timeline giving them, born in 68 and 69, which for me were very fertile political periods, giving them a timeline back of all the politics that happened during their lifetime in little chunks. Something like this went more at the times onto experimental TV, like PBS had experimental late night shows. Europe would show a lot, Japan would show some. So that's very different. So should we put the light on and just see, does that address, like, that's a very different approach, right? Who was asking that before? Oh, hi. Very, very different. And so about 7 years of doing things in that different way. And the music in that case is, I would go to a friend of mine, Joshua Freed, ding, 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 ding. He used to do a lot of repeat loops, like loop music. And I said, I heard this sound in Europe and it woke me up a little. And I feel that sound like the chains of the playground, ding, 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 ding. And the church, well, can you do that? Can you make it? So he would compose. Then the second part was I knew Kim Gordon from Sonic Youth. And I said, what are you working on? It was a tighter knit downtown, I think, at that time. Oh, I have the song, and we talk about a couple of songs, and you say, Protect Me You. I said, that's so funny, I'm talking right about the period of sensuality to sexuality or something. Do you want to hear it? Yeah, I want to hear it, you know. Could I have the pre-release on it, you know? And then those are her words. She's a brilliant writer, doing that. And it was actually my editor, believe it or not, John Zeman, who did the third part, said, I make music too. And we did it that way. So
that was just brilliant. I've never seen it before. It's amazing.
oh yeah, thank you. It was 83, and then the end of the sequence was 87. I have the 3 parts with me, but I'll just tease you.
Yeah,
There's
bravo. That
2.
was just incredible.
Oh, thank you. So I shouldn't go with the Tombstone of Wonder Woman. That's what I think. It should be something else. Yeah, and that won first prize in San Sebastian Film Festival, was premiered from the American Film Institute Film Festival. I got the Maya Deren Award, the first woman in video to ever get a Maya Deren for independent film and video making. And if you want to know, it's Peter Wolin, who writes on film but had done film with Laura Mulvey. Did his own films, I think, after that. Peter, we showed it in Los Angeles at the American Film Institute. It premiered, and Peter came down. I have to say this. I was so scared. I was like, and then Peter came down and got on his knees. I was thinking, and he just said, "Thank you," and he kissed my hand. So that was nice. I remember that. So anyway, all right.
So Dara is a video and installation artist who lives and works here in New York. Her work challenges gender biases and addresses mass media through the intersection of video art and television. She was first introduced to the medium of video while she was living in Florence during the early 1970s, and she became a key figure in forming the feminist art movement that emerged within video art at that time. Since then, her provocative works have become among the most influential and innovative contributions to the contemporary discourse on art and television. Her work has been exhibited at the Museum of Modern Art here in New York, at the Whitney Museum of American Art, and the Metropolitan Museum of Art, at Tate Modern in London, the Reina Sofia in Madrid, MACBA in Barcelona, Kunsthalle Wien in Austria, Museum of Contemporary Art Kiasma in Helsinki. I mean, this just really is like a laundry list of the most important art venues in the world. The Moderna Museet in Stockholm, the National Museum of Modern Art in Tokyo, the Museum of Contemporary Art Los Angeles, SF MoMA, the Pompidou Center in Paris. She's participated in count them, three documentas in Kassel. Documenta 7 in 1982, Documenta 8 in 1987, and Documenta 9 in 1992. It's, I don't know if anyone has participated in more than three, perhaps.
No woman. 40 years, I realized, 40 years. And I will share it with you the best I can. I started in around 1975, 78. And the real difference, I think, between me and generations coming up, which includes, I can see there's an age difference here, different people, different ages, that is you have total access to imagery pretty much. And when I started, there was almost no access to imagery. And so something like Wonder Woman, which I've become pretty known for, I think it's going on my tombstone or something, is that I had to pirate it. I had to kind of steal it, you know, and go in and not ask permission, to be honest, because permission would not have been granted. And it is copyrighted material. But my feeling is that it's a corporation, a corporately made, you know, image, and therefore it's for mine, for the taking. That I wouldn't touch another artist's work, and I wouldn't appropriate another artist, but I would appropriate what I thought was my landscape. And in the year 1978, when I made Wonder Woman, the average American family, according to the Nielsen ratings, was watching TV some 7 hours and 20 minutes a day in America, which is kind of incredible. So I thought that
No woman.
No woman.
Okay. In 2009, her work was the subject of a major retrospective at SMAC in Ghent, and that then traveled to Museu Serralves in Porto, Portugal in 2010. Dara is represented by Marion Goodman Gallery here in New York. She received a Bachelor's of Art in Architecture from Carnegie Mellon and a BFA in Painting from SFAI, and we're very happy that she teaches both here in MFA Fine Arts and also in the MFA Art Practice Program, which is how Dara and I first met. Please join me in welcoming Dara Birnbaum.
You know, I feel a little, I've lectured in a lot of places, and I've never been anywhere, I'm going to be honest with you, where everyone, except this is like a town hall meeting, I have the feeling, it has that feeling to it, that where people said, oh, we're going to show so-and-so, we have the salon, we have the lounge, I have the bathroom, we're going, you know, and doing this and doing that. And actually, when I started to show, I started in alternative spaces, and I had no belief in the gallery system, actually, and I do have a great gallery now, which I'm proud of. So it's been a long road. The most important thing I could do is really to hone in and make my work kind of challenging what that language is and what television is, and see what I could do with it. The first work that I made, I'll go quickly through it. And you were saying that questions should come at the end?
If you'd like to take them earlier, that's fine.
Yeah, I think if you have a question that is so important, just yell it out. The first is lesson plans. Oh, and also to talk about, only because you've addressed it now, about showing and who's showing whom, and if you don't make it into the club because the bouncer didn't let you in, what other club can you go to, you know, kind of thing. I'm sorry, but that's how I relate to it. Is that unfortunately, about last week or 2 weeks ago, I was talking with Joan Jonas in conversation at Artist Space. Was anyone there? Yes. Yeah, it was. I thought it was pretty good. So you're going to hear the same thing, but I'm going to repeat it right now. Is that how do you get to show? And this first show at Artist Space, I was turned down. So they sent someone over. Dan Graham was nice enough to say, this woman, young artist, seems very interesting. I think you should see her work. And at that time, Artist Space was by recommendation, one artist to another artist. And they sent somebody over, we're not going to mention whom, and he was in the audience.
Now to introduce our speaker tonight, Dara Birnbaum. I actually first saw Dara's work in college when I took a video class at Brown in probably 1987. Shoot, please silence your cell phones. It was a piece that you may see a clip of tonight called Technology Transformation Wonder Woman. I think in 87 we probably wouldn't yet have used the term remix to describe what she was doing. But she was doing what some, what's that?
Mashup.
Mashup, maybe? But no, not a mashup, because you weren't combining it with another text, with another video. So maybe a remix. But anyway, she was talking back to the medium of television from the perspective of a feminist artist, and using the medium itself to critique the discourses that it was propagating, kind of turning it against itself in what, for me, was a really mind-expanding way. And it really influenced my work, the work I was doing early on when I was just becoming an artist. So I'm grateful to you for that.